Hi guys, today I want to show you how to take your lump of clay and how to change it into your chop or your carved design. So last video I showed you the worksheet and kind of how you went through and practicing around with line weights and how you developed your signature. And then on the second sheet you were asked to go through and figure out, okay, come up with a bunch of different designs. So these were the designs I had from before. Once you select your favorite design, then what you're going to do is you're going to take a 6B pencil or above. So we need a really soft lead because this is how we're going to transfer our image backwards onto our clay. So I'm just going to stick with my traditional this is usually what I carve on the bottom of all my pieces. And with a very generous hand, I'm going to lay down lots and lots of graphite. So if you did really tiny lines, you might have to make them a little thicker because the pencil's a little wider, but you'll thank yourself by making the lines a little bit bigger. When they're really skinny, they tend to break really easy and they're very hard to carve. So I'm going to go back over all my lines, make sure I've got lots of graphite on those lines. The other thing I want to check for is these little tiny white spaces because I need to carve those out. And if they're really small, it's going to be really hard to carve. So you might lose some of those components, but we can figure that out kind of as we go. So our next step here is to get our lump of clay. So I have a little over an ounce here. I rolled it kind of into a fat coil. It's about 1 inch. Then what I did is I very gently tapped it on the table because I want a really smooth surface. So find a nice clean spot of your table and tap it down nice and flat. Some people go the extra effort to kind of shape this as well. So if you want it to be kind of squared or rounded, you can play around with the shape there. But in the beginning stages, it really doesn't matter as much. The most important thing is just making sure that this surface is flat. Okay. Then what I want to do, I need to get this image onto the flat surface here. Now I also need it to be backwards because when we stamp it, it's going to go into the clay. So the best thing you can do is get just a slightly damp finger and put a little bit of water. Just rub a tiny, 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 tiny bit. This is going to help kind of pick up the graphite when you transfer the image. I'm just kind of almost making like a little bit of a slipped surface here. So I can see I've got kind of a little bit of a gloss there. And then whatever image I'm hoping to transfer, I'm going to press my clay down and then I'm going to kind of give it a little bit of a shake. The whole table's shaking here. And kind of rub that graphite into the clay. And then when I flip it over, I should see a mirror image of my design. I'll try to get out of the shadow here. So you can see how it's a backwards design. Lovely. Now at this stage, if your clay is really wet, you might actually store it overnight so it starts to become leather hard. I already did that with this piece of clay. I kind of formed it, left it out for a little bit just so it got close to leather hard, nice and cold feeling. So I'm ready to carve. But it will be challenging to carve if the clay is really wet. So now what I have to do with my design, I need a relief design. So my design needs to be raised and the background needs to be cut away, kind of like on this guy. All right, so you can see how that part is raised and the background is cut away. So the first thing I'm going to do, I have some tools over there. These are called lace tools. They're very sharp blades. You can use this guy. I also have a few that kind of look like this that you can use. It doesn't matter to me what you use initially. I'll put a little white background here. I'm going to try to get this so you guys can see without the glare. Right, there we go. Then what I want to do, I'm going to take my knife. I'm just going to cut away all the excess clay. So I really don't care what the background looks like. Just removing all this excess, getting close to my design, but not cutting my design yet. So I want to remove as much of the background as I can because you don't want to stamp the background with your design. Okay, so I kind of got that in nice and close, kind of just chunked all that away. I can throw that in my slip container. Then what I want to start to do, I work on the outside areas first. You can use this really sharp blade. I also have these Zyam tools are really nice. It has a fun blade here. It has like a little dot guy on the end. These are called lace tools, that little curved blade there. I also really like the Zyam loop tools. So you can come in here. But what I want to do is everything that's not my design, the background space, I want to remove. So I'm going to come in here, work a little bit at a time. And you notice I kind of just cut away. Cut away. And if you wait until your project truly is leather hard, this is not too challenging. It's when it's really soft that it comes back and it's hard to carve. It gets mushy. So I've kind of got to get in that little section right there. So maybe I come in with my loop tool and I try to figure out how to remove this little excess area here. So I'm going to come in here, scoop this away, and keep kind of going around my design. So hopefully you can see that as I work around. So you might find yourself working with a variety of tools. It doesn't matter how deep you carve. You just want to make sure you push it away. So already I kind of showed that I kind of went too far on one line. I might have to adjust my design, or I might have to start over, and that's okay. You know, the beautiful thing about this is if your image doesn't transfer correctly, if your stamp doesn't work out very well, just wad the clay back up, try again. I'd rather you get it correct than leave it, you know, really sloppy or anything like that. So I'm just working on these little tiny legs right here of my M, cutting away that negative space, working my way around the outside first. I think that's the easiest approach as I sculpt this. And I'll try to get this in the light here. So it's a little upside down. But you can see how I'm cutting away the bottom of my M. So I have a little bit of my tail right down here. So you see because of the shadows. All right. So I'm just working around my design. And if your design doesn't transfer very well, you might have to redo it. And that's okay. Just put more lead down, redo the worksheet, put more graphite on there. So I'm carving back pretty deep because I've learned that if you make them too shallow, they just don't show up very well when you go to stamp them into the clay. So I'm going to keep going around and around and around and around and around, cutting away my excess a little bit at a time, trying to reveal my signature that's tucked in there somewhere, right? When it comes to those interior areas, it's really hard to scoop those areas out. So your best bet, you can try with a loop tool to kind of remove them, or what I usually recommend, especially if it's a triangular shape, take one of these loop tools, or I have a bunch of these really tiny, tiny, tiny tools. Just push the clay back, and it will take control. It's a little bit of tedium, but just push the clay back enough. And if we feel like we need to really remove the clay, we can. But these curved lace tools are really going to be your best bet for those little tiny areas. So that's why I said, you know, when you look at that design, if you see those little tiny areas, no, you got to carve them out. So you might have to adjust your design idea if it's super, super, super complex. So I'm going to keep coming along here, just taking away a little bit at a time, deciding which tool I want to use. Maybe I want to come in here with this loop tool, remove this clay away. And then after I'm done carving, the nice thing about this stamp is that all that matters is the very front of the design. So if the background's really ugly looking, like back here, pretty ugly looking, it doesn't matter, okay? Because you're not going to see that in the final product. Now, if it bothers you, yes, you can come back in. So I'll keep going around, keep cutting around my design here. All right, so I keep kind of going around and around and around. Then what I'm going to do is, last thing will be, once I carve it all the way out, I'm going to do one last little tap on a flat surface to make sure this design is nice and flat. And then I let it go bone dry. And once it's bone dry, we can actually stamp it in a piece of clay and see how it looks. Once again, if the image doesn't transfer correctly, just put more lead down on your drawing, transfer it again. If you mess it up in the carving, just grab another piece of clay, try again. When all is done, you've carved all of this out, it's nice and clean. We will come in, and where we have very straight lines, we will try to kind of keep them straight. And when we have curved lines, we might come in and like round the curves where necessary. So I'm off the screen here. Try to like take this little paddle and try to make it nice and round as best we can. Because like I said, how it pushes into the clay, that will matter. So I was trying to create that little curve part right there. Then we will make a coin. Once we get it all bone dry, we'll make a coin so we can make sure we know what it looks like and it's the design that we want. Some people do opt to do extra designs up here, maybe do an alternative stamp on the back. I do encourage you, if you kind of whittle away all this clay, consider a handle for your stamp, whether you score and slip an extra little piece on the back. Some people really tried to make them ergonomic. So here they've added like a little curved handle to their stamp. So the hard part here, like with this design, is they left this big brick around their design versus cutting all that away. And it's hard to place when you're stamping it in your clay. So I always encourage people, just have your design be the stamp. It's when you have a bunch of negative space around your design, it's hard to place. So I would cut all this off. So that way I always know exactly where I'm putting my stamp every single time. One thing you want to avoid is doing the intaglio. So don't carve into the brick. That's a no-no, all right? This does not look good because they've drawn it with a needle tool. And when they press it into the clay has to go up into the stamp, and it just doesn't look very good, okay? They don't have a very bold line. So it really is best to do the raised design, okay? So you can see how it's raised off the brick. And then I do encourage you to cut away as much of the excess as you possibly can. So that's kind of a longer tutorial, but I hope that helps you in the carving process.